The great Canadian singer-songwriter Leonard Cohen died 6 years ago, but his legacy lives on in such classic songs as Hallelujah, Suzanne, Bird on a Wire, and many, many more. Now, Cohen was proud of his Jewish roots, and though he was a religious seeker of sorts, they certainly played a big role in his life and work. But now a new book is out by the Canadian-Israeli author and journalist Matti Friedman titled Who by Fire? Leonard Cohen in the Sinai. That explores an often overlooked but maybe important episode in his life, the visit he paid to the Sinai Peninsula in the midst of the 1973 Yom Kippur War, giving impromptu concerts to Israeli troops in between their battles with Egyptian forces. And joining us now is the author of that book, Matti Friedman, speaking to us from Jerusalem. And Matti, great to have you on. Certainly, anyone could understand the fascination with Leonard Cohen. Netflix has a whole movie just about his love affair that inspired the song So Long Marianne. But a lot of people don't even know about this episode, him in the Sinai. Why did you write a book about it?
When Leonard Cohen came to Israel in 2009 for what turned out to be his last concert here, the explosion of excitement among Israelis really caught me off guard. I grew up with Leonard Cohen in Canada, but I couldn't quite understand why so many people in Israel felt so strongly connected to Leonard Cohen. When tickets went on sale for that concert, the phone lines crashed within a few minutes and 50,000 people came out to see him play. And in a daily paper at that time, I saw a story about this very weird concert tour that had taken place in the middle of the Yom Kippur War. And it always struck me as being a very strange and very powerful moment that someone needed to unravel what was one of the greatest artists of that time doing at the tip of the Sinai front at what might have been the worst moment in Israel's history post-1948, which was the Yom Kippur War. It took me a couple of years to put everything together, but it eventually turned into the book that just came out, which is called Who by Fire?
Right, and it's really fascinating. I was at that concert. It was amazing, but it really says something about Leonard Cohen's relationship with the state of Israel, this great Jewish artist, and you really go into that, some new information, even how it is expressed in one of his greatest songs.
Right. So one of the big question marks in this story is, what did Leonard Cohen think he was doing here? And what complicates research into the story is that he almost never talked about it afterward, which is interesting in itself, considering how significant the experience was for him and for the soldiers who encountered him in Sinai. The breakthrough for me was finding a manuscript that Cohen himself had written immediately after the war, which described his experience in 73. And he just kind of poured his heart out into these 45 typewritten pages. They're very raw and unedited and eventually unpublished. He sticks it in a box and they never see the light of day. And I managed to find the manuscript and used it to kind of draw the portrait of this incredible artist at a moment of personal crisis and a moment of a national crisis. And as you mentioned, he writes one of his most enduring songs here, which is the song Lover, 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 which is written at an Israeli Air Force base. And it's a song that's written, in front of an audience of Israeli pilots and an air crew who were being decimated in the first week of the Yom Kippur War by anti-aircraft batteries over the Golan Heights and over Sinai. He's singing to people who might not be alive next day, and he knows it and they know it, and it adds a real power to those concerts. After the war, he writes the song Who by Fire, which is inspired by the Yom Kippur liturgy. So he comes out of the Yom Kippur War and writes a song that's linked to this incredible prayer at the peak of the Yom Kippur service, which says, today is the Day of Atonement. It's the Day of Judgment. God is going to decide who's going to die and who's going to live. And if you're going to die, he's going to decide in what way you're going to die, who by water and who by fire, who by sword, who by wild beast. The prayer goes on to give many colorful and graphic ways in which people could die. And not long after that prayer was recited on Yom Kippur, a siren went off at 2 p.m. and the war began. So the prayer and the song and the war are all wrapped up, and it's all part of this story that I tried to put together in Who by Fire.
Right. There's some pictures of him also on the cover of your book, him with the soldiers. Also with Ariel Sharon, who later, of course, became the prime minister. I mean, did we know what Ariel Sharon thought of Leonard Cohen, if anything?
He seems not to have thought anything of Leonard Cohen. There's a great picture of Cohen standing next to Ariel Sharon, and it's hard to think of two more different, figures, really two maybe Jewish archetypes of the 20th century, the man of, poetry and the man of war, and both, of course, completely necessary, but both so different from each other. I looked in Sharon's memoir for a mention of Leonard Cohen, couldn't find one. I called Sharon's son, Gilad, to ask him if he'd ever heard his father mention Cohen, and he had no memory of his father ever mentioning Leonard Cohen. On the other hand, Leonard Cohen definitely mentioned Ariel Sharon, who seems to have made an impression on him, and he devotes a paragraph in this very raw manuscript to the meeting with this great general who he both abhors and admires. And it's really a memorable meeting, again, a meeting between two incredible Jewish figures of the 20th century.
Right. I'll note that former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu actually after Cohen died, did sort of speak of him, said he was a great friend of Israel. So he made an impression on one prime minister, at least. I want to ask you, going back to that concert, which I covered as a journalist, there was tremendous pressure by the BDS movement for Cohen to not play here, to boycott. He tried to organize a parallel concert in Ramallah to sort of find the balance, and that was canceled by pressure, and give the money to Amnesty International. Maybe talk about that, because we think of Leonard Cohen, he wasn't very strictly political, but a sort of more progressive figure, trying to balance his feelings with Israel with his other instincts.
So when he came in here, he got kind of ensnared in our very ferocious local politics, and the idea of having a concert in Israel was accompanied by the idea of doing a parallel concert in Ramallah and donating the proceeds from the concert to groups that are, working for peace and coexistence. But the concert in Ramallah never happened because the Palestinian side was not willing to have a concert if Cohen played in Israel as well. And the whole kind of idea of using the concert as a springboard for peace and reconciliation never really worked out. But anyone who was at the concert, and you were lucky enough to be there, remembers that it was quite an incredible moment of connection or reconnection between Leonard Cohen and this audience in Israel, which absolutely adores him. Again, 50,000 people come out to see Leonard Cohen in a pretty small country, and I think if they could have fit 100,000 into the stadium, they would have sold 100,000 tickets. And it ends with this almost religious moment, or maybe not even almost, maybe a religious moment, where Cohen finishes the concert with the priestly blessing, the Kata Kohanim. Of course, Leonard Cohen was a Cohen. He was a member of the priestly class whose job it is to say this blessing, to bless the congregation and to call down divine protection on the congregation, and which is, I think, part of what he was doing in the Yom Kippur War. And the concert in 2009 kind of closes a circle that begins with this incredible tour in 1973. All
right, Matti Friedman. The book is Who by Fire, Leonard Cohen and the Sinai, available in Hebrew and in English. And you're giving actually a live appearance in the first station in Jerusalem tomorrow with some of Leonard Cohen's music being played. Good luck with that. Matti Friedman, thanks for joining us.